Hello again. Nice to see you again. Today we're going to be looking at another exciting topic, disease prevention. And we're actually looking at basic science. So it's for students between the JS1 classes up to the JS3 classes, or you can call them year 7 to year 9, all right? So we're looking at disease prevention. Now, these are some of the subtopics we're going to be talking about under this particular topic. And we're looking at waterborne diseases. We're going to talk a whole lot about it. We're going to look at the disease. We're going to look at symptoms. We're going to talk about their causes. We're also going to be seeing how to prevent waterborne diseases. The next thing we're going to be talking about again is sources of clean and unclean water. We're going to look at sources of mostly clean water. That's where our focus is. We're also going to be looking at water treatment processes. That is how to purify your water. And then number 4, we're going to be looking at advantages of using pipe-borne water. So these are a few of the subtopics we're going to be actually explaining, or we're going to be talking about in this topic of disease prevention 1. All right? And really it's going to be very exciting, waterborne diseases. Let's begin by looking at waterborne diseases. Now, diseases caused by unclean or dirty water, they are really called waterborne diseases. So any disease that can be contracted when someone uses dirty water or unclean water can be referred to as waterborne diseases. Now, below are the following, we're going to be looking at some of the waterborne diseases. We're going to be talking about cholera. We'll talk a little about dysentery, diarrhea. We'll talk about typhoid. Other waterborne diseases include guinea worm. We also have the shigellosis. All these are examples or types of waterborne diseases. Now, let's begin with the first one, which is called cholera. I believe the word is not so new. We're going to be looking at some of the symptoms of cholera and what someone might notice as the symptoms when one contracts the disease called cholera. Now, cholera can be caused by a bacterium, and that bacterium is called Vibrio cholerae. So bacteria that causes cholera is called Vibrio cholerae. And remember that the name of the disease is called cholera. Hence, it actually came from the bacteria. Now, there are several symptoms of cholera diseases. Some of these symptoms include vomiting. It includes abdominal discomfort or pain. The person has diarrhea, that is frequent watery stooling. The person will have rapid dehydration and restlessness. These are some of the symptoms that someone might face when the person is actually having cholera or is infected with that virus, so with the bacteria called Vibrio cholerae. Now, the sources of such kind of disease is when contaminated water, which is being contaminated with feces of the carrier, is being used, okay, to wash food, to wash utensils that are used for cooking food, for also drinking. When somebody drinks those infected or contaminated water, the person actually ends up having that bacterium called Vibrio cholerae. We've already mentioned some of the symptoms, like we talked about abdominal pain or discomfort. We talked about vomiting. We have dehydration. We have severe diarrhea due to irritation of the bowels by the toxins from the bacterium. So these are some of the symptoms that can be contracted or can be seen when someone has contracted the bacterium that causes cholera, which is Vibrio cholerae. Then we have treatment and prevention. Now, one of the ways to prevent cholera is by boiling water before drinking it. Most of the sources of water we have around here here in Africa, mostly in Nigeria, most of the sources of water may not be totally free or clean. Most of them are actually contaminated. And so one of the best ways to actually avoid or prevent cholera is to boil your water before drinking it. Next one is oral rehydration. Remember, one of the symptoms of cholera is that the person or the victim is dehydrated. All right, so one of the ways to keep the person hydrated is oral rehydration. All right, then number 3 is the use of antibiotics. Now this one has oral rehydration, and the use of antibiotics are ways we can treat cholera, patients with cholera or those that are infected with the disease cholera. And some of the antibiotics include tetracycline and the chloramphenicol drugs. Now, another way again to prevent it, or prevent, not treat, is proper health education. Now, people should be taught, or children or teenagers should actually be taught the hygiene of always washing their hands after using the toilet, washing your hands before eating, covering of your food, because one of the vectors that carries the Vibrio cholerae is the housefly. And when the food is not properly covered, before one eats it, it can most of these vectors like the housefly can perch on the food and thereby depositing or transmitting into your food the Vibrio cholerae, which is the bacterium, and when it is ingested, the person becomes infected in the same process. Another way, again, you can prevent cholera is through vaccination. Go get vaccinated to prevent yourself and your children from having cholera. The next waterborne disease we're going to be considering today is dysentery. Now, dysentery is somehow similar to cholera, but a little different. Now, one of the causes of dysentery is that it is caused by a one-celled animal called amoeba. Now, this amoeba causes what we call the amoebic dysentery. Dysentery can also still be caused by certain bacteria. Now, however, there are several symptoms that shows that one is actually infected with these bacteria or protozoa. One of them is high fever. The person shows high fever. Then there is also vomiting and stomach upset. Another thing again is that the person experiences severe diarrhea, but when the person is actually passing out the frequent stooling or the stool, it contains blood, or you see several mucus inside of the blood. Now, inside of the stool. Now, these are signs of dysentery. One of the ways to prevent dysentery is actually boil your water before drinking. Boil your water before drinking. Like I said before, that there are visible blood or mucus in the feces along with severe abdominal cramps. These are all signs and symptoms that a person is actually infected with the bacterium or with the protozoa that causes dysentery. The next one, number 3, is diarrhea. We'll be mentioning diarrhea when we're talking about cholera. We mentioned diarrhea. When we're talking about dysentery, we mentioned diarrhea. So what are the causes of diarrhea? Now, diarrhea can be caused by bacteria. It can be caused by a parasite. It can also be caused by a virus. Now, there are several symptoms of diarrhea. One of them is that frequent stooling, which leads to dehydration. Frequent stooling that leads to dehydration. There is also presence of abdominal pain, high fever, bloating of the belly, and so on. These are all signs of diarrhea. Now, how do we prevent diarrhea? Now, food eating and water taking should be hygienic. Now, if you check these waterborne diseases, you will understand with me that one of the major causes of waterborne disease, or one of the major sources of waterborne disease, is lack of personal hygiene. Now, if there is a high regard for personal hygiene, I think there will be a reduction in the transmission of this endemic, of these waterborne diseases from one place or one person to another. So please take note of this. Personal hygiene is one of the key ways we can actually reduce drastically the spread of waterborne diseases. Next one is typhoid. Typhoid fever. Now, typhoid is actually caused by a bacteria we call the Salmonella typhi. Salmonella typhi, like I said, is a bacteria, and the symptoms of typhoid includes feeling cold, severe or serious headaches. We also have fever and muscular pains, runny stomach, and so on. Now, one of the ways people contract this typhoid fever is by drinking and eating contaminated water and food. Eating contaminated food, drinking contaminated water. So typhoid can be gotten not just by food, but you can also get it through drinking water, all right? Drinking contaminated water. Now, how do we prevent typhoid? Now, typhoid can be prevented by boiling water before you drink it, hygienic handling of food, and proper sewage treatment. These are some of the ways we can actually prevent typhoid. Now, in general, how do we prevent waterborne diseases? Now, waterborne disease is actually prevalent mostly in developing countries. And one of the ways we can prevent it is that the government also should play a major role in providing clean water, clean drinkable water. Number two is provision of safe place for the disposal of feces. Now, when most of these feces are dumped on landfills, and probably the rain starts coming, and based on the rain, most of these things are washed into water bodies, and these water bodies can then be used by several industries in producing water and all the others. And if the process is not properly treated, the water is not properly treated, there can also be a transmission, an outbreak of waterborne diseases. So provision of safe places for the disposal of feces. Number three is that disinfecting water to kill pathogens that may be present in the water supply to prevent them from growing again in distribution centers. So we're talking about disinfection, disinfecting the water. Now, let's look at some of the sources of clean water. Now, like I said before, there are several sources of unclean water. You can get them from contaminated rivers that are actually close to industrial where factories and industries are actually sited. This can be, that particular water can be actually polluted, or it can be a source of unclean or contaminated water. But let's look at sources of clean water. Number one, we have the pipe-borne water. Number two, we have rainwater. Rainwater is actually clean. But though it has to be purified or undergo several purification processes. And then number three, we have the spring water. The spring water is also a clean water. We also have the certified, treated, bottled, and sachet water. Certified, treated, bottled, and sachet water. Now, these water can also be nice to take. They are actually clean, all right? Now, the next thing is water treatment. Now, like I said before, water can be gotten from any source. And it can be gotten from any source, but it can be treated. Even if it is unclean, it can also be treated. Now, let's take a look at ways we can treat or purify water. Some of the processes involved. Number one, we have aeration. Now, aeration involves allowing air to mix with the water. Now, this helps to remove dissolved ions and manganese. It helps to remove dissolved iron and manganese. The next one is coagulation. Now, coagulation most times goes alongside with flocculation as well as sedimentation. Because in coagulation, as we have here, it has to do with the adding of chemicals to the water, which makes some suspended particles in the water to clump together. Now, that's also the same thing that happens during flocculation. In flocculation, there is the dissolution and stirring of alum in water to make tiny solid particles suspended in water to also clump or stick together. So they flocculate. Now, after flocculation, the next thing is sedimentation. These suspended particles that have clumped together will then sediment at the bottom. So we can easily remove these suspended solids that are being trapped in the water. And that process is what we call sedimentation. So we have it in this regard. You can see coagulation, which has to do with the addition of a particular chemical. And then when we have added the chemical, you can see that these substances, there is a coagulant which absorbs onto impurities. Now it clumps with the impurities and then they settle at the bottom of the tank. Now that is also sedimentation. So when flocculation has actually taken place, then the removal of those particles that have sedimented is what we call sedimentation. Now, after sedimentation, those impurities that are clumped together or other impurities that are found inside of the water that is being treated can be removed by filtration. Now, filtration involves the removing of impurities from the water. Now, in the laboratory, we use filter paper to carry out filtration. But in industries or water corporations, they use what we call the filter bed. Now, you can see in the diagram there, we have the filter bed. There is pebbles, there is sand, there is charcoal, there is sand, there is gravel, there is twigs, and then when you pass clean water through, or when you pass water through these processes, which we call the filter bed, you end up getting a clean, clear water. Now, that the water is clean and clear doesn't mean it is safe for drinking. The next stage that is, will I say, almost the finishing to the process of treating or purifying water is disinfection. Now, during disinfection, we have several ways we can disinfect, but one of the common ways to disinfect is to add chlorine. Now, chlorine gas can be added to kill bacteria. Now, it is harmless to human beings. Chlorine also can be used to purify water in the swimming pool. Now, after this, substances like fluorine or fluoride and iodide or iodine can be added in little quantities into that treated water, which can then be distributed. Now, the addition of fluorine and iodine, fluorine helps for strong bones, development of strong bones and teeth, while iodine helps to prevent goiter. So these are some of the processes that are involved when treating water. The first one we have is aeration. After aeration, you go to coagulation, flocculation, and sedimentation. After that is filtration, and after filtration is disinfection. Now, the next important thing and the last thing to look at for today is advantages of using pipe-borne water. Now, what are the advantages of using pipe-borne water? Pipe-borne water can be used. Now, one of it is that it is clean, it is colorless, it is odorless, and tasteless. And the reason is that most dissolved suspended particles, those dissolved and suspended particles of matter, have been removed. That is why it is clear. That is why it is colorless. That is why it is odorless. And that is why it is actually tasteless. All right. Number two, because those impurities actually gives it color, it gives it odor, makes it have taste. And what a clean water should be odorless, colorless, and tasteless. Number two, it is treated to kill disease causing living organisms or microorganisms. Most pipe-borne waters are treated with the addition of chlorine. treated. We have chlorine in tablet forms. We have chlorine in liquid form. You will have it in gaseous form. There are several ways you can apply chlorine to your water that will help to safeguard it. Okay? So these are some of the advantages of pipe-borne water. Number 3 is that it is conveniently available in your homes. Conveniently available in your home. So you can easily reach out to clean water for drinking and for other domestic use. So this is where we're going to call it a wrap-up on this particular class on disease prevention under the topic water-borne diseases. But before we go, let's take a look at a few questions using our Examguide app. I'm just going to answer 4 questions, all right, because of time. Now, first one says, which of the following is an example of waterborne diseases? Which of the following is an example of waterborne diseases? A, we have cold. Cold is not a waterborne disease, it's actually an airborne. B, we have measles. Measles is actually airborne. C, we have pneumonia, which is also airborne. D, we have tuberculosis, which is also airborne. And then E, we have typhoid. And typhoid is both waterborne and foodborne diseases. We've just talked about typhoid fever. So our correct answer here is E, which is typhoid fever. Number 2, an agent that passes pathogens from one living organism to another is actually referred to as a vector. Is referred to as a vector. Number 3, okay, I'll pass with that. Now look at this. The vector responsible for the spread of dysentery. The vector responsible for the spread of dysentery. Remember we said that dysentery, if you look at the symptoms of dysentery, they are actually synonymous with that of cholera. So, and the vector that is responsible for the spread of cholera is the housefly. Hence, the also vector responsible for the spread of dysentery is the housefly. And then, okay, look at this. This is the last question I'm going to answer. Which of the following is not waterborne disease? Is not waterborne disease. Cholera is a waterborne disease. Please take note. Diarrhea is a waterborne disease. Dysentery is also a waterborne disease. Hepatitis, please note, is also a waterborne disease. But the one that is not a waterborne disease is syphilis. Syphilis is actually a sexually transmitted disease. That's an STD. So this is where we call it a wrap-up. Please try your hands on more questions using the Examguide app. We're going to see in our next videos. Bye for now.